What's up, folks? Long time no see. It's been a while because it's been a while since I've worked on these things. Earlier in the year, had a lot of personal, family, and otherwise stuff that really just pulled me off. You got to back burner some things, and this is what got back burnered. So you'll see the only difference in the last you saw them was the vinyl on the outside and the spray foam insulation inside. I'll talk about those two things real quick, but the main purpose of this video is that we're going to go up on site and talk about some of the infrastructure. We've got our well drilled, we've got our septic permits ready, we've got a lot of our underground power run. We'll go through all that, kind of talk about all those expenses and flow of events and things like that. Real quick, we'll talk about the vinyl. So I subbed out the vinyl installation. I had every intention of doing this myself. There's not much to it. I didn't sub it out because it was something I couldn't figure out or something that was kind of beyond my scope. I just did it because life started happening. I knew that these things were going to get back burnered, and I knew they were going to sit here for a while before they got any more attention. So I wanted to go ahead and get the vinyl over my house wrap, get that good exterior protection. That way I'm not worried about any potential damage or degradation while they sit here and wait for me to start working on them again. So we went with this vinyl board and bat. I'm very happy with it. Originally wanted to go hardy board on these things, potentially some cedar shake on the other one. But the more we looked at it, the value it would cost in money and effort is just not going to be repaid. You know, if you rent these things for a weekend or a week or whatever, you're not really going to care whether that's vinyl or hardy board. Hardy board does look nicer. It's a higher end product, but it's got a lot more maintenance. We can kind of get in, I'll run through the vinyl and then we'll talk about why we didn't do the hardy board. So the vinyl installation is very easy. You've got all this J channel that goes around your doors. The windows we used actually kind of have that channel built into them, but everything else you just trim out with this J channel. You can cut it with snips. It just screws in there. Everything on the vinyl is slotted. You want your fasteners to go almost all the way in, but you don't want to hold it tight, because that vinyl will expand and contract with the temperature, and if you sink those fasteners in tight, it doesn't give it room to breathe and it'll start to ripple. We've got a little bit of that, but no big concerns. But that's something you want to watch out for. That's really the main thing in installing vinyl. Other than that, you're just cutting the pieces to the right size. It's plastic, it's very easy to cut, and there's 1,000 different ways to do it. But there's just not a whole lot to it. Cost-wise, I think we're about $650 into each one as far as the material cost. Labor-wise, I think the installation was about $1,800 each. I think that's about all we can cover on the vinyl. It's very simple. Happy to answer questions if you got any, but there's just not a whole lot to it. The reasons we didn't do hardy board are many. So the hardy board installation, there's just a lot more to it. It's a lot more difficult, more tools required. Nothing really I didn't have, but I did go through and kind of learn the process of installing the hardy board and bat siding. There's a lot more to it. Like I said, the effort to get that done just wouldn't pay off. It doesn't bring any real value to the tenant, I don't think. It's also messy. It's a lot messier install. It's concrete board, so you're basically cutting through concrete, so you get the mess that comes along with that. And then the last thing that really put the nail in the coffin on it was the maintenance. So every 5 to 7 years is the manufacturer's recommendation on recalking and repainting the hardy board. Being that these are going to be investment properties and they're going to have tenants in and out, ideally all the time, obviously that's not going to be the case, but we're not going to want to kind of stop everything to come up and do all that maintenance. Not only is it costly, it takes a lot of effort, and the value's just not there. Interior is the same as you last saw them on the plumbing and electrical video. There's no difference other than we do have our spray foam installed. I did sub that out. Spray foam, you can get kits and you can do it yourself. It's a pretty exact science. I figured I would waste a lot of money and time trying to figure it out. So what we did sub those out. 3 inches of closed cell in the ceiling and 2 inches in your walls per the NOAA certification. So we did have to have that touched up. All we did was go in and spray more on top of it. It's not like you have to take it out and redo it. So the guys that did my vinyl siding also have a spray foam operation. They came in, buttoned everything up. I really appreciate, they did a great job for me. They didn't just come in and cut the thin parts, add in. They didn't just add another inch on the ceiling. everything is pretty well full stud depth, closed cell insulation. So these things are like Yeti coolers with windows. They're very well insulated. You can use other insulations. The NOAA code does not absolutely require spray foam. It does add a little bit more weight than traditional insulation, but like I said before, weight is not really an issue on these things as they'll sit in one spot most of the time. Without further ado, let's get up the mountain and we'll talk about that site work. I seem to pick the hottest day to do this, and I'm paying for that now. Apologies for my stumbling if there's any of that. I'm kind of trying to shift gears back into the YouTube video mode. It's a lot different than my little kind of 10-second interactions on Instagram. So apologies if it's a little bit choppy and mumbly stumbly. But that's what we got. We're getting back into this thing. We're gonna figure it out. Let's get up the mountain. Well, this clip is a little out of context visually because I've already finished all of my filming for the video, but I just remembered I did not touch on the cost of the spray foam. So our initial run that was a little thin was $3,800. That was for both houses. So that would be $1,900 each. And the additional foam that we had to add on, that was $1,500. So that was a total of $3,300. So 16 and change per house. First, I wanted to talk about kind of the land purchasing process that we went through, how we decided what we were looking for, where we were looking, how much we wanted to pay, what sort of restrictions and stuff we needed to pay attention to. We wanted to do multiple tiny homes. We kind of landed on the number 5. We wanted those to all be private. We don't want them chopped in, you know, kind of right next to each other on the bluff. We're putting outdoor showers on these. They'll have hot tubs. The whole theme that we're going for here is a cabin getaway. Full privacy, cabin getaway. You can escape the world, escape the hustle bustle. There's a lot of tiny home communities out there and a lot of little, you know, even 4 or 5 of them stacked up right there on the river or on a bluff or whatever it is. And all that stuff's nice. I'm not gonna talk bad about it. But I don't want to leave my neighborhood to take a little weekend vacation getaway and just go to a smaller neighborhood. So we've got 15 acres here. About 10 of it looks like what you're seeing. We've got some nice rolling hills, a few trees. It is absolutely beautiful. And then behind you is about 5 acres of woods that goes out to the bluff. About 175,000 in the land. Got about 12 or 13,000 in cutting in this gravel road. And now we'll get on to talking about the well and the septic system. Again, these are the big expenses. These are the infrastructure. These are the, you know, hire a crew of guys and an excavator or well driller or whatever it is. This is where you really start spending money. And buddy, did we do it on the well. Let's just get right into it. What we've got here is a 550-foot deep well. Right over there, we've got another hole that has been filled that was about 130 feet that we had to pay for. What happened was we started to drill the well right over here. I had a guy come up and do the voodoo, witch and find water, and felt confident. Got good water down there. All we got to do is drill it. Finally get the well guys up here. If you're gonna have to drill a well, go ahead and schedule it right now, because seems like all the well drillers everywhere are I got this drilled 9 months after I called the guy. So go ahead and get that done. Get that phone call made. What happened on the first one? So we were drilling down and you pay by the foot. So you've got a steel casing that goes down a certain amount and the rest of it is just drilled. So you pay for, in my instance, it was $21 a foot to be drilled. And then the metal casing, I think, is like $36 a foot. All told, we're in this thing $18,600 for what you see here. Just a hole in the ground with a pipe in it. We had to do about 130 feet of the steel casing. Normally you only need 20-30 feet of the steel casing to get you down to that bedrock, at least around here. But what happened, we hit a void at 120 something feet, like a cave. And the way the well driller works, they've got to maintain a pressure in that hole. If you've got a void, obviously that pressure is going somewhere else. Any airflow or water flow is going somewhere else underground. You don't know if it's a giant cave or just a little hole. You have to run your steel casing all the way down past that void. And that gets very, very expensive. A lot of weird decisions. So we got down to the void on that one, hadn't found any water. Then you got to make the decision, okay, do we find a new hole? Or do we keep drilling and hope we find water? A lot of people will tell you there's water down there. All you got to do is keep drilling and you will find it. You know, that's not always true. We decided to move to a different hole. I was kind of torn. You know, I was looking at moving the hole about 15 feet, which seems like if you want, you know, if you want to have good luck, you would move further away. But we couldn't really get much further away from the homes themselves. So, talking to the well guys, I said, you know, sometimes you can move over 5 feet and it's totally different ground. It's totally different hole. Kind of looked at the way the ground fell a little bit and decided maybe we'll find something different. We absolutely did not. We found the same thing. And having already drilled about 300 feet combined between the two, I said, well, let's just keep drilling. There's got to be water down there somewhere, right? Eventually we found some water, nothing fast. We do not have a fast flow rate, but because the well is so deep, our water line is actually at about 113 feet is where it came back up. So we're holding about 420 feet of water. You've got 1.5 gallons per foot inside your well. So we're gonna be holding between 600 and 700 gallons of water at any time. These tiny homes are not gonna use much of that water, so we should be fine, good to go. Average well around here costs $7,000 or $8,000, but that's what it is. We've got water now and we're ready to go. The way this works, they'll drop a pump all the way down in. It's gonna sit at about 535 feet. You don't want it on the very bottom because then you're gonna be pulling your sediment and silt and stuff like that through your pump, which is not good for it. So we'll have the pump all the way down in there. That will feed out. We'll have a pump house, just a little shed style pump house for the pressure tank and the pump controls and power and all that we'll build just right here beside the well. You don't really want to put your pump house right on top of your well because when you're pulling the pump out or if you got to do any kind of maintenance, it really limits you. Even if you had like an 8-foot ceiling in here, pulling that pump out, if it's just exposed to the sky, they can pull in a rig and raise it up and everything like that. I won't get too far into the specifics on the well pumps because I don't know that much about it. That's something that I'm gonna have my well driller. I'll get the well house built and then I'm gonna have him come in and install everything. So that's what we've got for the well. It's finally drilled. It took forever, incredibly expensive, a lot of heartache, but we've got water on site now, so that's great. So we're sharing power and water across property lines. There's nothing that really stops us from doing that. The single well can feed really as many houses as it will support. Does not have to be on the same tax parcel or anything like that. With our power, the way we're doing it, we already had a power line coming all the way back here, which was incredible. We didn't have to pay to run power back to the bluff. So what we did was we took from this pole right here, we took and ran underground back into the woods towards the bluff. About halfway back, we've got a 400 amp meter base. So from that meter base, we'll feed out 200 amps to each tiny home. And then from that meter base, we'll also pull our power back here to the well house to run the well pump and your lights and heat in the well house and things like that. In the interest of keeping this kind of as naturally and as wooded as we can, we decided to run everything underground. That is more expensive. Obviously, you have to trench everything out as opposed to just letting the power company put a pole in, but it's gonna be worth it because it's gonna keep everything real nice and pretty. From that 400 amp meter, like I said, we're running 200 amps to each home. And the way we're doing that is sort of like just an RV pedestal. So we've got a pedestal sort of close to where each house is gonna go. That's got our main power, our main disconnect, and everything like that. Instead of just doing a plug-in like a true RV pedestal, we will have it hardwired and probably run under the ground and routed into the houses themselves so that you don't just have, an RV cable, but you can absolutely do it that way. So in the interest of getting in the shade, let's walk back to the bluff and we'll talk about septic systems. So this is kind of our first home site. Like I said, if you're going to do anything in an area, anything residential in an area that does not have city sewer, you're going to have to put in a septic system in the ground. Codes and everything don't really take this kind of thing into account, the tiny homes. So you do just have a minimum, here we have a minimum 750 gallon septic tank. So if you've got a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom, you still need a 750 gallon septic tank. Even worse than that, you can see these things are sloped downhill. The bluff is right there. Got a lot of clearing to do, but the bluff is just maybe 30 feet, 50 feet behind me, something like that. So obviously we cannot run our septic lines that way. We've got to run them uphill. That means you've got to pump your septic. If you've got to pump your septic, you've got to have a pump tank, which is the same size as your primary tank. So while it sounds crazy, it's what we got to do. We're putting 2 750 gallon septic tanks in the ground for each tiny home. Cost on that, the systems themselves on a nice piece of land that they can just dig in the dirt and install them, the systems I believe were $7,500 each. So that'll be the minimum that we'll pay. But out here, we're on the bluff, so there's a good chance we're going to get into some rock when they try to bury these tanks. If that's the case, they have to just get a big jackhammer up here, jackhammer out a hole for the tank, and set it in there. That takes a lot of time, which takes a lot of money. We could be as much as $25,000 in septic systems. That's, half of that each home, which is absolutely insane. Like I said, all this infrastructure stuff is just where you really start to spend the money. The septic systems for the other 3 are not going to be near that because they're going to be on a lot better soil. Won't have to pump them, so we'll only have to have 1 tank. So I think that covers most of our infrastructure. I'll do a quick rundown on price. The land was $175,000. The septic systems are going to be $20,000 to $25,000 for those. We're $18,000 in the well, plus another about $7,000 for all the pump and system and underground work for that. And then the initial underground power that we ran, the meters and all that stuff, came out to about $20,000. Worked with a few different guys on it, but combined it came out to I think about $20,000. All right, so after running some quick numbers in my head, and I have not done this yet, so it kind of hurts, but it looks like we're going to be between $250,000 and $300,000 just for the land and having it absolutely ready to bring the tiny homes up here and plug them in. That is a lot more than we planned on going into this venture. The numbers still check out at the money we're spending. We're not an incredible amount over budget, but most of the other land that we were looking at was well under $100,000. This is where we are. This is what we've got. It goes to show that, you really do need to do your research on numbers. There were, I expected a big number on septic. I was figuring on about 10,000 each, which I was very close to. That was a good call. As far as the well goes, there's a lot of wells up here. I've talked to a ton of people who've had wells drilled. 7,000 or 8,000 seemed like a good number around that, so I bumped it up to 10 for the cost of the well house, and that was way off. We're going to be easily double that by the time we get all that done. So you just want to make sure you track all that stuff and don't wind up in a spot where your money borrowed payments turn into more than you're actually bringing in on rent, because then this whole thing doesn't make sense. Learn from my mistakes, really dig in deep on those numbers, on that infrastructure stuff in the early portion of your planning. It's just going to make it a lot easier to stomach when that does happen. You're going to be a lot more prepared for it, and your numbers are still going to make sense because you've planned your numbers around those things. So I know it's been all over the place, pretty unorganized. I didn't put a whole lot of time into this because honestly on YouTube, I think everybody is a lot more interested in the ins and outs of the tiny home themselves than my personal project. The next steps are we've got to get our power run over to the well. Then I'll get my well house built. Once that's built, the guys can come in and install the well pump and pressure tank and all that. Once that is in, we've got running water, we've got power, then they'll come in and install the septic systems. For the septic systems, they've got to have water and power to install those, because everything has to be inspected. And if you want to inspect properly, obviously it's got to have water in it, and it's got to have power for your pumps and your alarms and things like that when you're running a pump system. But once we've got the septic systems in the ground, we'll come up here and we will pour our concrete piers. The plan is to do a 12-inch concrete pier under each of our leveling jacks. So then we can just drive them in, level them up on the jacks, do the skirting, and keep trucking. So those are the next steps. The next video you will see is likely going to be putting those piers in the ground. And then after that, we'll be moving these suckers up the mountain. I'm very anxious to get these things in place, because once we do, all the subbed out work is pretty over. I'll be doing the lion's share of the interior work. I'll be building the decks. I'll be doing the lion's share of the landscaping, all that stuff, because it falls on me and because I won't have to coordinate it around different contractors and things like that. Is going to happen very fast. I'd love to have these two renting before the end of the year. I'd really like to catch the tail end of fall, but we will see. I'm optimistic. I think that that's absolutely doable, but you know, if one contractor has to push 2 weeks, it could push that out. It's good to have goals and aspirations, but it's also good to be flexible. I think that's all I got for you. I am absolutely talked out. If y'all have any questions, as always, jump in the comments. Happy to answer them. Otherwise, we will see you in the next video.